Modern.
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 We're prepping for a voyage.
Modern.
The force of an old-fashioned equals whiskey mass times bitters acceleration.
Why don't you make that a double?
Modern bar cart.
What's shaking, cocktail fans? Welcome back to another glorious episode of the Modern Bar Cart podcast. I'm your host, Eric Kozlik, and before we jump into today's episode, I've got a few announcements for you. First, we've got a great opportunity for you listeners here in the DC metro area to come and hang out with us in person next week, November 9th, 10th, and 11th of 2017 at the Emporium event at Union Market in Northeast DC. We'll be sampling our product, answering all your cocktail-related questions, and everything will be on sale at a special discount. So be sure to purchase your Emporium tickets and prepare for that gastronomic noshfest drinkapalooza. And speaking of Emporium, we're actually using this event as a kickoff launch celebration of our new bitters gift sets just in time for the holidays. That's right, we've got our extremely popular Embitterment Organics line shrunk down into adorable 30 ml bottles with all four flavors, aromatic, orange, lavender, and chocolate, lined up in a really excellent gift box, which is perfect for your travel needs, and it makes an awesome gift for all the cocktail lovers in your life. So be sure to stay tuned for more updates about our gift set and, in fact, some other new products that will be rolling out in time for the holidays as well. But for now, we're going to turn our attention to the subject of today's episode, rum. It's an intriguing tropical spirit with a dark and sordid history, and I had the happy privilege of digging into all the weird and wonderful details with my friends Ben Lyon and Jaime Windon of the Lyon Distilling Company, makers of all things yummy and rummy. They've been good friends, role models, and supporters of mine for a few years now, and their rum is one of the great pleasures in my life. And so I think we should take this as an opportunity to make ourselves a drink before we dive in. Today's featured cocktail is a Modern Bar Cart signature cocktail called the Tiki Tricycle. And this is something I developed when I was trying to take the complex, nuanced flavors of tiki drinks and eliminate some of the tricky steps and ingredients. So whereas most tiki drinks have a laundry list of ingredients, including multiple rums, juices, and syrups, this recipe only has 4 ingredients total. So you can kind of think of it like a tiki cocktail with training wheels. To make the Tiki Tricycle, all you need is 2 ounces of dark rum, a half ounce of Hot by Sly, our cinnamon chili syrup, a half ounce lime juice, and a healthy dose of Embitterment aromatic bitters. And the cinnamon chili syrup and the aromatic bitters lend a lot of complexity to the drink, while the lime juice melds with the syrup to give it that velvety, tangy texture that's the signature of so many wonderful tiki cocktails. So you shake that all up in a cocktail shaker with ice, and you enjoy it however you prefer, on the rocks, straight up, or even in a highball glass with ice. Delicious. That recipe is up on our website as well, so feel free to head on over to the recipe section if you need a refresher on the ingredients at any point. And now that you've got a delicious Tiki Tricycle in hand, we're going to pedal on back to my conversation with Jaime and Ben, where we discuss the differences between all those rum varieties you never knew existed, how distillers make rum that tastes grassy, funky, and pretty much every flavor in between, the surprising history of rum in the United States and abroad, classic rum cocktails and spinoffs you should try at home, why bananas belong in dunder pits, that's right, you heard me, and much, much more. Ben and Jaime are the people who first sparked my interest in rum as a premium sipping spirit and cocktail component, and I couldn't be more excited to share their knowledge and enthusiasm with you all. So without further ado, please enjoy this curious, slightly silly, and potentially overproof conversation with my friends Jaime Windon and Ben Lyon. Jaime and Ben, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
So today, obviously, we are going to be talking about rum. But first, if you wouldn't mind, just introduce yourself to our listeners and tell them kind of your background and anything you want them to know about who you are as a person before we get into the details of rum.
All right. Well, my name is Ben Lyon of Lyon Distilling Company. I have a fairly specific background in all this stuff that we're doing here at the distillery right now. I was a home brewer in college, very enthusiastic drinker early on, and then went on to actually, right out of college, work for one of the first craft distilleries in the country, and that was how I got my start, and sort of took all that knowledge I had from home brewing and sort of learned that in distilling, you're sort of doing all the fun stuff that we love about making beer, and then taking it one step further. And so that was how I got started. And I've obviously gotten deeply into kind of the cocktail culture and all that good stuff. But I'm also a competitive sailor. So early on, was introduced to lots of interesting and weird rums that we weren't always getting distributed here in the U.S. So that was also one of the reasons why we've been so passionate about rum and have sort of kind of gone into the deep end in producing it. So
cool.
Yeah.
My name is Jaime Windon. I am the co-founder of Lyon Distilling, and opening a distillery was not my dream, it was Ben's. I enjoy drinking rum. I've been behind a bar for many years, started bartending right out of high school, and have traveled all over to many rum-swilling countries, from India to Africa to the Caribbean, places you wouldn't often expect sugarcane spirits, but indeed, they're all over the globe. And I have fallen in love with making rum alongside Ben and our growing team, but I'm much more interested in handing someone a drink or a glass of rum and seeing their experience, and I'm all about people. So having a distillery here has been a wonderful way for me to connect with people on a totally different level, but using my experience in food and drink and hospitality. Yeah.
Great. Well, that sounds like a really good set of backgrounds to obviously open a distillery and then have it be a fun place for people to come in and learn. And I've definitely seen it firsthand where people have, I've been in your tasting room when people have come in, and it's a really cool experience, not only to see them taste your rum, but then to kind of like learn about the whole process. So you guys do a great job here. I definitely recommend that folks do come out to St. Michael's, Maryland. Not only is it a beautiful town, but they have, a lot of stuff to do here as well. So the topic of this episode, as we discussed, was just to kind of get in a little bit deeper than we have been so far in the podcast into a specific spirit. We've done some kind of high-level stuff about different categories of spirits, maybe kind of like liqueurs or vermouths, or but I really want to take a very deep dive into rum, what makes it special, and kind of what distinguishes it from other spirits out there. So could you give us maybe a formal definition of rum and then kind of like a functional one, if there's different definitions out there that might be helpful to people?
Well, I mean, formally, rum is made from any derivative of the sugar cane. So it can be cane juice, cane sugar, or the most traditional molasses. We have sort of a more modern kind of scandal in the rum world, which is the making of rum from sorghum molasses. And so technically, sorghum is both a grass and thus then in turn a grain. And the TTB has allowed a few quote-unquote sorghum rums to come onto the market, which those of us who take a more sort of traditional tack in our production don't really love. But anyway, it's sugarcane based.
Okay. And is there so as long as it's sugar, it's rum?
Exactly. And that's one of the fun things. I mean, rum has this one rule, whereas many other spirits, as you know, have multiple rules. So as long as you're using a sugar from sugarcane, be it the three Ben mentioned, or a hybrid, you can distill it in any manner you like. You can distill it on a pot still or a column still. You can age it or not age it. You can flavor it or not. You can spice. You can do so many things. So Ben is famous for saying a line that I repeat daily to our customers: pull 50 rums off the shelf and they can all be wildly different. And I think for us, that's one of the most exciting things about making rum, and a real interesting way to take one of the world's oldest spirits and make it new again and make it distinctly American in our own way.
And I think one of the things that we tried to do early on was, obviously embrace what it means to be a craft or artisan or, distillery of that. We sort of hesitate to use those terms, but what is it that we can bring to this spirit? So early on, we settled on a hybrid recipe of half cane sugar, half molasses, sort of combining the elements of all these, of all the different types of rum into one, and so sort of making the spirit a little bit more modern take in that sense. But then we use pot stills. We do a very traditional double distillation. It sort of harkens back to the really classic heavy Jamaican rums and sort of really classic rums of the Caribbean, where they were made using old European pot stills. And so sort of taking those techniques and then introducing a modern recipe. And that's sort of our little hybrid and kind of where we've gone with it.
Gotcha. So a lot of variability, a lot of different styles. I have one quick random deep dive question. Is if rum is anything made with sugarcane, where does cachaça fall into that?
Cachaça is kind of like the most deeply defined, right? It's the most strict of rum. So it's kind of a high level. So it has to be made from that fresh pressed cane juice, and the fermentation must start within 24 hours. Is that correct?
Correct.
So that's where you have your strict rum. Everything else is a bit loose. And so if we chose to make it from raw sugarcane juice, we still couldn't make cachaça because there's no way probably we could get that sugarcane juice here to Maryland from Louisiana within 24 hours. And I believe, does cachaça also have to be made in Brazil?
Yes.
So then
there's the geographic designation.
Yes,
too.
exactly. So it's double. Yeah.
Right. So just so people are aware, cachaça, a Brazilian kind of staple. It's their take on white rum. It's kind of like some people call it their version of moonshine. And the classic cocktail made using cachaça is the caipirinha, which is very popular. It's kind of a almost like a old, or not an old timey, but kind of a grittier version of the mojito. So that's kind of cool.
So cachaça falls into rum agricole. So when people see a bottle of rum and it's spelled R-H-U-M and it's rum agricole, that distinguishes that it's made from sugarcane juice. And then if it's made in Brazil, then it's a Brazilian rum agricole, henceforth cachaça.
Correct.
Right, and that's something that I think we should get into here as we're defining rum, because rum obviously has a very colonial heritage. Ben was just talking about how it was first made using these European pot stills that were literally put on a boat, I'm guessing, and dropped into the West Indies.
Exactly.
And there are two primary strains of rum, from what I understand. I could be wrong. One is the British version, and then there's the French version that Jaime was just talking about, the agricole, spelled R-H-U-M. So what are the defining characteristics of those? What sets an agricole apart from a British style?
The agricoles you find give you this really raw, grassy, funky note. I think one of my favorite characteristics of a lot of well-made agricoles is that you will smell this agricole in the glass and you'd almost swear it was olive juice. But then you taste it and you get this beautiful, raw, grassy cane note, and you get that inherent kind of sweetness, and you can really get a sense of what it was made from, but the nose deceives you. And that's what's sort of exciting and technical and challenging about that spirit. Your classic molasses-based rums are basically get their characteristic from the fact that they have lots of cane oils and proteins and everything concentrated in your fermented base, because molasses is the waste product of sugar refinement. So basically, after we've processed our perfect white table sugar or our turbinado or whatever it is, the molasses is that funky, heavy stuff that's left over afterwards. So you get a very distinct characteristic with it, and it's the one that obviously was most popular because, why use all your fresh cane juice that you can make into sugar when you can take industrial waste and then turn it into booze, and sort of the ultimate value add there. So.
Gotcha. So the agricole is the cane juice, and then the British style. Is there another name for the British style?
No. It's rum.
And so that's the heavily molasses based.
Correct.
And just to bring things back full circle here, so what Lyon is doing, if I'm right, is you're kind of taking some of the characteristics of both of those. You're taking the sugar, which is kind of the closest you can get here to the cane juice in terms of purity and grassiness or any of those light notes.
Right.
And then you're also kind of incorporating the dark molasses notes as well.
And the idea there was, by using the turbinado, you're getting some of the same type of organic elements that you get from rum agricole, but you're not freaking people out because it smells like olive juice.
Well, and that's also one thing I did not know until we started experimenting with all these different types of sugar, is how many different variations of sugar there are. And so when we explain it to our customers and the people who visit us, the closest thing most consumers know is sugar in the raw. But sugar in the raw is so much cleaner than the sugar we get. What we get is the first press of the sugar cane that's evaporated the first time into sugar. And it's this raw, it's almost like damp sand. It has cane juice rocks in it, still. And so it's really not processed for consumption. That is the sugar that's sent to the refinery to be turned into white sugar. And then, of course, brown sugar, which I didn't realize, is just white sugar with molasses added back to it. So what we're going for is we're going for that raw, sticky, damp, unrefined sugar so that it has the cane juice still present, an element of it, if you will, and combining that with the molasses that was left over. So the only thing we're not using is the raw juice that was pressed out, but we kind of get the first two runs from the same sugar mill, which is really nice.
That's really interesting. One of the things I definitely wanted to talk about is one of the, from an outside perspective, one of the sort of disadvantages, I think, of using something like sugar, although what you were just saying kind of hints at that this might not be such a big disadvantage after all, is when you're using grains like rye, for example, or malted barley or something like that, you have the opportunity for something, I guess what we would call it would be terroir, where the grains and where you get them and how they're treated, and this is especially the case with fruit and grapes, really affects the end nature of the spirit. But with sugar, it doesn't seem like there's that much of an opportunity. So what you're saying, Jaime, just to make sure I have this right, is that the different types of sugar and your decision about which type of sugar and how refined it is going to affect the flavor in the end product.
Absolutely. And I think what Ben was talking about with agricole, rum agricole is the one spirit that absolutely has a sense of terroir. And you get that sense, and terroir being the earth, the flavor of the environment. And of course, in distillation, it's a lot harder to sense terroir than it is in wine or beer, because we are actually evaporating and recondensing. In the way we do it at least twice. So you do get a lot of character because of the stills we choose to use. The columns on our pot stills are the shortest I've seen ever in my entire life to visiting multiple distilleries, which really captures a lot of flavor in that distillate vapor. But yes, absolutely, we are able to incorporate a bit of that by using that specific strain of sugar. So why not get creative with your rum mash bill? And I think people are more and more now. I look to fellow rum distillers and I see them using 2 types of sugar, 3 types of sugar, 4 types of sugar. But when Ben came up with this idea a couple years ago, I had never seen anyone use a hybrid. It was either or. And so I think that's another interesting thing that craft distillers are bringing to the rum category is, all right, let's start with the basics. Because we all think about rum as after the fact. There's not a ton of appreciation and delving into, the nuances of white rum. There's more now, and especially among our rum nerdy friends, we do. But for the most part, the variations in rum come after the fact, after the barrel, after the flavoring, after the spicing. But if you can really start at the beginning and treat your rum mash bill with care, you're going to get a more interesting white spirit and therefore more interesting product overall.
Right, and mash bills, literally the last episode that I recorded and published is we kind of dove into the effects of the mash bill. So that's really cool to hear from a rum distiller. What does your mash look like? It doesn't probably look like a traditional whiskey mash, right?
Well, I mean, for rum, it's, you're dissolving sugar and molasses in water. So it's, it's this dark, sticky, kind of molassesy, sugary, sort of mixture.
Looks like a porter.
Yeah,
it looks like a porter.
Yeah, it looks like a
it
stout or a
bubbles like
porter.
crazy. Once the fermentation gets going, I call it the booze jacuzzi. It looks like a root beer float at the top.
And I think the best way to think about it is our first step is that we're literally making molasses beer. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's what we're doing.
Yeah.
And that's it.
You make a white rum, like the products that you started off with. You started off with a white rum and a dark rum. What's different in the process between those two products?
So white rum is just your raw spirit, except if you go to Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico is the one place that has a weird designation for white rum, and that is that it has to be aged for 1 year before you can call a spirit rum. And so for Puerto Ricans to make white rum, they literally have to put the rum in a barrel, set it aside for a year, and then they charcoal filter it back to white. That process doesn't exist anywhere else. It's only in Puerto Rico.
And
So
to
obviously-
cut in, this is
yeah.
where you're going to see that rum gets very tricky. Rum
Right.
is a tricky spirit. So just because usually we tell people if it's clear, it's a raw spirit. It's a
Right.
moonshine, whether it's a vodka, a white clear gin, a clear rum, that is your raw spirit. That is your new make. Your unadulterated, straight off the still, cut with water. But not the case in Puerto Rican rum. So sorry,
Right,
go
and
ahead,
that's
Ben.
and that's the only one. And then beyond that, rums classically get their color and flavor from either barrel aging or the addition of caramel or spice elements. And so the one other little technical thing is that you can add up to 2.5% by volume of caramel to rum without stating it on the label or getting any kind of formula approval for it. And that is really derived from the fact that we all got really used to in our aged rums that were, whether they're being imported from the Caribbean or being made here, they had this characteristic. And it wasn't just from barrel aging, it was from the addition of these flavoring elements. And so we really got really used to our aged rums having a little bit of caramel in there. We associated that with a really good black or dark or aged rum. And in fact, that doesn't exist naturally at all. But it is one of those characteristics. So, you either have your white rum or you have, rums that get their color and flavor from either the addition of flavoring elements or the barrels, or both.
And then to clarify on what Ben just mentioned, that you can add this small percentage of caramel. It's not just caramel, it's of the original ingredients you used to make the rum, correct? So that's where you can have traditional black rums with a little molasses added back to them, or in this case, modified sugar.
Yeah.
And that was one thing that I thought was really interesting that Ben brought to the table, having also a bit of a culinary background and saying, why don't I make this caramel from scratch? Although many rum distillers will add caramel or caramel flavoring or things like that to the rum, which to us just goes against everything we do, because the only things that end up in our bottle are made from raw ingredients. We don't import any flavoring or extracts or anything like that. So he said, why don't I try my hand at making the caramel that I used to make in the kitchen on a grand scale? And that really was pretty innovative, especially if you look at the caramel burns on his hands after 198 batches in the last 4 years. But I think that's a really wonderful way that we were able to distinguish our white rum and dark rum immediately with so much rich flavor, but without, fakery, without adding vanilla and caramel and things like that. Like, I make a big deal of saying the caramel is made by hand because it's a totally different flavor. Mm-hmm. And yes, so the difference is that the white rum is that's what we make all day long, every day. We make white rum, and then we decide if that's going to be proofed down with water to become in the bottle white rum, or if it's going to go in a barrel or have caramel added, things like that.
Cool. And caramel, just to clarify, is you're literally just putting the sugar that you use to make the rum into a pot, a large pot, I imagine at this point, and you stir that around and let it brown, get close to burning.
Exactly.
And then it's just a matter of making sure it doesn't burn all the way.
That is where the skill lies, and the technique is.
We've known each other for a few years now, and I'm really grateful for the role that you've played in my evolution as somebody who appreciates spirits, who understands the process. I have sort of an ancillary role in the spirits world, in that we make mixers, but obviously I couldn't exist and do what I'm doing without you all. And one of the things we've done for the past 2 years is we've taken a trip down to Tales of the Cocktail in New Orleans. And this past summer was exciting because you got to go see your sugar production for the first time. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, it was great. It was off season, so it wasn't the best time, but we are all, like I told you, I'm all about people. And so our company really, as it grows, is all about people and the people that we choose to do business with. And I'll be the first to tell you that not everything we source is local and not everything we source is organic, but we only deal with good people whose business philosophies line up with ours. And so it took us a while to find the right sugar partner. We were small. If you back up 4 years, we were buying 5-gallon buckets of molasses, turning it into 25 bottles of rum, selling that rum and buying more molasses. We were very, very small. So I went through a couple of different sugar providers, and we ended up with Lula Westfield, which is down in Bellarose, Louisiana, about 50 miles south of Baton Rouge, about an hour west of New Orleans. And we have been using them now for the last couple of years. And so these ship us both the molasses and the sugarcane. So I got to go visit them on a rainy summer afternoon and see their area, their plant. I got to see molasses with our name on it that was ready to be shipped out because we get a shipment about every 2 to 3 weeks now. Up now to about 30,000 pounds of sugar a month or so we're going through, which is crazy. But more exciting, the entire team, we are taking all 7 of our full-time staff down to New Orleans in 2 weeks, and we are going to be there for the harvest. So we are going to spend 4 days cutting sugarcane, grinding it into sugarcane juice, and watching the process of turning it into molasses, the very molasses we'll be using over the next year. So what I've learned is that sugarcane is an immature crop in the United States. That is, it cannot grow for its full cycle. So what happens is, even though we think about how hot Louisiana is, especially for those of us that visit in the summertime, they do get a freeze. And so they have to make this decision of when to start cutting in order to cut all of the sugarcane for the year before it freezes. So they start around late October, like they've started now, and they'll cut and process 24 hours a day around the clock until the first freeze. Because if they wait too long, they're in trouble. And then they'll have everything done and ready, and they'll continue to process. They basically set up the entire structures every year, break them down, clean them, and set them up again. So it's wild. So we're gonna zip into the heyday, and we're gonna know a lot more as a team when we come back. So we're really excited.
And that's something I've never done. So it's
No,
gonna
me
be,
neither.
It's going to be very interesting.
Yeah, everyone's
it's,
excited.
Cool. Well, so one of the other things that we did this past summer is we actually met a couple of other rum distillers down in Louisiana, and they gave us a little tour. And while I was at this point, I mean, I thought I pretty much had it down. I thought I knew my shit. But we got there, and then you guys started talking about this thing called dunder.
Yes.
And it seemed a little sketchy to me, and so I figured instead of trying to do my own research and botching it up, I figured I'd let a dunder expert talk to our listeners about the role of dunder, because if I hadn't heard about it until this past summer, I imagine that most of our listeners have never heard of it.
Right.
So let's hear it.
So dunder is a really traditional, mostly Jamaican addition to the rum. The origins of it are not tremendously well known. The only thing that we really do know is that lots of Caribbean distillers did it. And the idea was you took some of so we do 2 distillations in the stills, but basically after you do a distillation, you've got your rum wash or your mash or whatever you want to call it, that you've evaporated all the alcohol out of. You will take a portion of that and you will then either include that in each subsequent distillation, or you'll take some of that and you'll put it into your new fermentations. The idea being you're getting more of that funky, raw, organic material, the molasses oils, the proteins. And then the biggest thing, the esters, which then go on to, basically end up in the subsequent distillations and create depth and complexity and character in your rums. And then beyond that, when you age the rum, you've got these esters binding to the carboxylic acids in the woods, and you're getting all kinds of fabulous complex flavors and character. So, the dunder pits, though, are So yeah, right. So we have dunder, and then you get to the reality of these things, which were the dunder pits. So they were literally these stone pits in the ground, and there are legends about dead goat heads being thrown in, lots of nasty stuff being chucked in there. But the idea was you had this pit that was sort of kind of rotting, but because of the acidity. So molasses is really acidic. So because of the acidity, you weren't getting bad bacteria in there. You weren't getting bad yeast strains in the dunder pit. So while it might have smelled terrible, it wasn't toxic. And so you basically had a secondary fermentation going in there to the point where you only had to take a few little ladles full in, kind of a multi-100-gallon fermentation to introduce some really heavy esters. And so there's actually one distillery that exists still in Jamaica right now, and they make the highest ester rum in the world. And this isn't, and because they're specifically using a type of dunder that they have, but the ester content is so high, you don't want to drink it. And it's really only used for rum extract and perfumes of all things, not a beverage rum, because the ester content is too high. So it's one of these things where you sort of get into in distillation, sometimes less is more. Definitely the case with your esters and your dunder. But basically, it's just this nasty pit of rotting. Sometimes they would throw fruit in there. Modern distillers have tried to replicate some of these things by throwing banana peels in, because bananas are the only pre-esterified fruit. And so there are lots of ways you can sort of modify this process and sort of recreate it. But that's the idea, is esters are sort of what you are desiring to get out of your dunder pit, but they're these nasty rotting pits of spent wash.
Which is the reason I always said no to dunder.
Right.
Ben was like, we're going to dig a pit. And I was like, I don't think the landlords will like that. And, we're not on a Jamaican island with a lot of property. We have neighbors all alongside of our building. We're in a neighborhood. But one of our first employees asked Ben if he could start a dunder pit, and we did one in
a bucket.
50.
In a bucket.
It was a bucket, but didn't we have a 50-gallon drum at one
we
point?
did.
And it was all we used. There were no goat heads, for the record. Absolutely zero goats were harmed in making this dunder pit. It was a lot of banana peels, a lot of fruit.
We ate a lot of bananas.
We ate a lot of bananas.
To get those banana peels.
But I don't feel like we noticed any distinct difference in improving the character of our rum. We really like our rum. And sidebar, all of our rums, even 4 years later, are very young. We don't have anything in the rum bottle that's even close to a year old. That's just not what we're aiming to do, because there are so many. It's not because we don't like aged rum. There's phenomenal aged rums, but we're always kind of going against the tide. So we're trying to perfect new, young American rum and change people's mind with some different techniques. And so we haven't had time for it to say, maybe develop, if you will. But we did experiment with it.
And I think the other thing that we started to realize too is that a lot of these old Caribbean rums were heavily flavored in this way because the distillation method wasn't very sophisticated. I mean, the rum was still really rough stuff. And so it might have this great flavor, but it's going to peel the paint off the wall. And I think what we've evolved to do in terms of our production is just really create better rum through, thoughtful consideration of our ingredients, but then ultimately really careful, high quality distillation methods. And that has been the evolution of the thing. And unfortunately, no dunder pits at the distillery. So.
But that's also what I'm most proud of. And that's why I love the opportunity to do a rum tasting. I will be the first to say our white rum is not our number one seller, but our white rum is every other rum we have as well. So I have people taste the white rum. They are always pleasantly surprised that it doesn't peel the paint off the walls, that it's not like that rough Jamaican rum that they tried that was white, that really wasn't meant to be drank. Right. Just like the unaged corn whiskeys in Kentucky that become beautiful bourbons in a matter of a few short years are not really meant to be enjoyed raw. Our white rum can be. It's very good. It's very flavorful. It's very clean. So even if that's not someone's favorite, the reason the dark rum is as good as it is, the reason the Sailor's Reserve is so nice after just a few months in a barrel, is because you had that really good raw distillate. So I encourage people to, with these newer distilleries, not just ours, try the white rum. You might not decide to buy that bottle or sip on it, but knowing where it started is why it gives you more appreciation for the final, barrel finished version, et cetera. They're not different rums. People make the confusion coming in here. Oh, the white rum, okay, I taste the grassiness, I taste the brightness. Oh, but the dark rum, this one was made with molasses, right? It's like, no. It's the exact same base recipe. It's then what you're doing after distillation to give it color and more flavor, more interest. But I don't necessarily think one is better than the other. It's just what your preference is.
And no dunder.
No dunder, unfortunately.
But Andrew and Patrick are using dunder at Relaison in New Orleans, and a very different style rum, and it's awesome.
Good results, I think.
Very good results.
Absolutely. I think that point that you both just emphasized in your own ways is one of the things that I always try to hammer home when people ask about, what bitters are. People say, I think it's really useful to be able to situate ourselves in historical context if we're going to communicate what we're doing today. And I think, the thing that I always tell people is that when these cocktails were invented with the use of cocktail bitters, the stuff that was coming out of the stills was in many cases just super terrible. Right. And then when you throw in Prohibition, you have the fact that people were watering down and adding all sorts, not just caramel or vanilla flavor additives, like some really weird flavor additives to the stuff. And so in a lot of cases, when I talk about bitters, I talk about it as a way to kind of add depth and nuance where there was none.
Exactly.
And I think that today's distilling technology and the advances that we've made in a bunch of different arenas allow us to make stuff that is sippable today that would never have been sippable in an age where cocktails really came of their own. And so when we talk about cocktails today and having everything elevated to the level of craft such as it is, I think it's just a different conversation. You can still make a great rum cocktail using the traditional ingredients. It's just going to taste way different today than it did back in the day. And unfortunately, we don't have a flavor. There's no way that we can communicate flavor across time in that way unless we come across, somehow these ancient white rum bottles that people were making the first mojitos with or something. But I think it's still a useful conversation to have because it teaches people, what's valuable today and the fact that it's valuable because we come from this tradition. So what I was hoping to talk about, since rum, you can't really mention rum without pirates and rum runners and all these types of criminals, and dunder pits are already suspect. So this rum definitely seems to be one of the most suspect spirits. So
Totally.
There's a long and sordid history.
It does. And rum makers tend to be a little bit of scoundrels in the past, adding so much to their spirit. And then, kind of its place in history due to prohibition, due to, even as far back as the 1500s when we had, Ben always talks about New London, Connecticut?
Yeah, so New London, Connecticut, up until the late 1800s was the rum capital of the world. And I tell people that, they're like, wait a second, this somewhat crappy industrial town in Connecticut made more rum than anywhere else in the world. Yeah, that's it's a significant piece of rum's history, and it's not altogether glamorous and filled with sailing and pirates and swashbuckling and all that stuff. So.
And the molasses triangle trade.
Right, and the trade of slaves for
and
rum and molasses and all that stuff that is kind of an unfortunate byproduct of the colonial era and a piece of how we got rum in the first place. But that's what it is.
Rum was the first spirit made in any large quantity.
Exactly.
In the States, pretty much until importing molasses became too expensive and farmers got better at farming and therefore had excess grains, and then whiskey took over. And I think now people always default to bourbon as the American spirit or to just whiskey in general because it's something we can say, hey, this is grown here, this is something we make from scratch, but hey, so is our sugarcane. We're not getting Caribbean sugarcane, we're getting sugarcane from Louisiana. So we like that history.
And I think too also when we start to look at spirits more specifically, where are they from, how are they made, talking about that word terroir. Maryland had, a booming rye industry. Rye whiskey was the big thing here. But it turns out most of the rye used in Maryland rye came from elsewhere. The distillers in Kentucky didn't have enough local corn to make all their bourbon. It had to come from somewhere else. So you have all these spirits that, essentially become what they are because of where they're made, not necessarily what exactly goes into them. And that's kind of a really interesting thing too. And, that sort of makes you step away from, the actual technical side of the distilling, and you get into sort of more of the, societal and anthropological background of all these spirits. But it's a really interesting thing. And rum covers more geography and kind of more people than almost any other spirit in the world. And I think that's kind of one of the really interesting things about it.
We looked into, we're in Maryland on the Eastern Shore, and we're in Talbot County. And so we tried to look through the Historical Society to find out any information about rum distilleries or rum production here. But unfortunately, most of that was wiped during Prohibition. So we know, but without hard authority, that rum was made in this area. But more interestingly to your question, we know that rum was run up and down the Chesapeake. You have so many backwaters. I think Talbot County has more shoreline than any other county on the East Coast. It's crazy, just all the little tributaries and rivers, and we're here on the bay, but on the Miles River. So Ben, I know you were just talking to someone about this, talking about the watermen being the original runners.
Oh yeah, well and that's the thing. They all, and it was a matter of simple economics. It's, well, you can go fishing, or you can just drive your boat down to the mouth of the Chesapeake, pick up a couple barrels of rum. bring them up to Baltimore or Annapolis or further north, and make the same amount in a day as you would in a month. So a lot of these guys stopped fishing, and they started running rum. They also knew the waters and you know where the shallow spots were, the geography, way better than the Coast Guard did. And on top of that, what I particularly like about Maryland's history is that the governor at the time refused to ratify any prohibition legislation. So Maryland was kind of the Wild West of booze. And so you did have this crazy, rum running, boozy, swashbuckling sort of, kind of heritage here. And that's kind of cool. And I, this summer in August, I was up in Newport, and, we're going around the harbor, and there's this old sort of slim, wooden boat that was there in the harbor. And one of the captains I was with said, "Oh yeah, and that boat right there. The owners have kept it, nicely restored. But that was one of the biggest rum running boats here in Newport, Rhode Island. And so it's cool. I mean, you have these little pieces of history that are there, and it's just a fun thing to look back on."
Yeah, for sure. So this is, after all, a home bartending podcast. So before we jump into the lightning round questions here, I did want to talk about maybe some of the most notable rum cocktails, so that we can give our listeners some homework and have them start practicing up on their rum technique, and hopefully going out and supporting their local craft rum distillers in the process. So do you have any favorite rum cocktails?
Absolutely. I think one of the best cocktails ever is the Classic Daiquiri. And that is my favorite rum cocktail. And that is simple. So for me, it's however much rum you want to use.
Exactly.
Use half as much lime juice, and however much lime juice, use half as much sugar. And there you go. You just cut this in half. And I like it chilled, shaken, and up in a coupe glass. That's how I enjoy drinking it. I feel like that's how I would serve it to Hemingway if he rolled into our distillery.
And it was his favorite drink.
It was his favorite drink. And there's all sorts of variations on the daiquiri too, and that's why it's so fun. So for me, the classic is just a really good, bold white rum like ours, or an agricole, or something really clean and bright and robust, and then fresh lime juice and fresh sugar. But you can get crazy with that too, and so that's the fun thing is, don't have white rum, have spiced rum? Sure, make a spiced daiquiri. Want to do it on the rocks? Just whatever you do. It doesn't have to be pink and frozen like a slushie. And so I think that the daiquiri is the most widely abused cocktail on some level, but also one of the simplest, cleanest, and crowd-pleasing of all. So that's my favorite.
For sure. And for the sugar, so it'd basically be like a simple recipe. Taking your ratio would be 2 ounces of white rum, 1 ounce of lime juice, and maybe a half ounce of like simple syrup.
Yeah, and simple syrup, can be equal parts sugar and water, dissolved, a little warm water or hot water. Or you can some people do a 2-to-1 for a really rich simple syrup. Some people do a spiced simple syrup. I've also gotten really crazy now liking the honey mix instead, equal parts honey and water instead of sugar and water. So yeah, I would say the daiquiri is the ultimate competition. Like you could do a home bartending and say, all right, we've all got different rums, we've all got different sugars, and we've all got lime juice. And so let's see what we can do.
We should do daiquiri competitions.
We should. Every day here is a daiquiri competition. Yeah. Although actually we recently had a fizz competition. We had a fizz off following Tales of the Cocktail, where we made, instead of just gin fizz, we thought we'd bring a rum fizz back or something, and we made a rum fizz
really good.
We made it with coffee rum, we made it with curacao, we made it with white rum. It was amazing.
Oh,
more fizz, more better.
Yeah.
The other thing I like is, and something that I just casually ended up encountering was, especially among bartenders in DC, the quote-unquote snackery is a thing where, they just want to make a quick drink for each other, and they just throw together a quick daiquiri. I was at an event, and one of the bartenders said, "Oh, what are you going to do with this white rum?" And I said, "Well, I'm happy to give you some." And he said, "Come with me." So we went over to one of the other booths, and he was like, "This is a great DC bartending tradition." There was a guy standing there. He's like, and the guy was like, "Well, what's that?" He's like, "Well, we're going to have snackeries." And so he made each of us a little daiquiri.
It's like a shot of daiquiri?
Yeah, basically, yeah, like a 2 ounce daiquiri, and down the hatch, and that was it. The snackery. So yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah. And this is a thing, I guess. I don't know.
The other thing I try to encourage people to do all the time, which is just me being a bossy rum person, is take pretty much any cocktail ever and substitute rum in it. So take white rum, substitute it for tequila and do rum margaritas. Ben likes to sub rum for brandy and do rum sidecars. We love our rum old fashions, using rum, like a dark rum instead of whiskey. So I think rum is so versatile. You cannot go wrong. You should never say, I have a bottle of rum and I don't know what to do with it. Like, that's just not acceptable. There's so many simple drinks you can make with rum.
The other thing I like about rum from a cocktail standpoint, I think we also have to remember that rum is just kind of an inherently more balanced spirit than your whiskeys and other things. I mean, whiskeys are often created in a way to be specifically unbalanced. You have to only use them in specific ways, otherwise it just doesn't work. And rum is something that that's one of the most beautiful characteristics of it, is that it's just this wonderfully balanced spirit that does so well in so many things because of that. So
It is very harmonious. The times when I make a rum cocktail where I have trouble with it is when it almost plays too nicely with everything else, where it's almost hard to see the lines where the flavors are coming from. So like in a classic Negroni, you taste the gin, you taste the sweet vermouth, and you taste the Campari, and that's part of the joy of that. But sometimes, like if I were to add a rum to, rum Negronis are great. And
They're my favorite. I was on a campaign for that last year, but we used our overproof rum. So we made sure we used 126 proof, really punchy, really bold rum, so that it did stand out.
For sure.
Yeah,
that's really cool. And one of the first cocktails I ever invented, actually probably the first or second cocktail I ever invented, not super inventive, but rum is a very, as Ben was mentioning, it's very New England spirit. And I basically just made a rum old fashioned using your dark rum. And then with the sugar cube, I muddled in some rosemary. And so it had that really fresh piney scent to it. So it was a rum old fashioned with rosemary.
I remember this.
Yeah. And I called it the Stopping by Woods.
Yes.
After the Robert Frost.
You did a blog about it, I think.
Yes.
Yes, I remember this.
Back in the day when blogs were good for getting the word out about anything. But it was really cool. So again, it just play around with it. Swap out rum in something that you would normally make. Unfortunately, a lot of rum recipes are tiki recipes, and those are very complex. They're delicious, but they're a fairly high barrier to entry. So we're definitely going to have a tiki episode, perhaps multiple tiki episodes, to kind of break down some of the ingredients and the processes that can make that easier for you as a home bartender. But I think good advice starting out is to just kind of start swapping rum in for other stuff and taste it on its own too.
Exactly. And the only caveat would be that if you're talking about coconut rum or spiced rum, all bets are off. Because we will encourage people to do a dark rum mojito, but I don't know about a spiced rum mojito necessarily. So you do have to be familiar with the rum that's in your bottle and then be able to compensate for that.
For sure. Cool. Well, rum aside, let's talk about Jaime and Ben now. Jump into the lightning round questions. These are the quick questions. Your answers can be as quick as you want. But we just want to kind of put your answers next to the answers of everybody that's come before you, and I think that's part of the fun of this format. So question 1, what is your favorite cocktail? And if you don't have a favorite of all time, what's something you've been more recently obsessed with?
For me, it's a Negroni. I love every type. I love a mezcal Negroni. I love a classic Negroni. I love a drink that's always going to delight me, but can always be different.
I feel like the favorite spirit question is a little bit obvious at this point. So, acknowledging that you have a wide variety of rums, so you can answer your rum, or you can go outside of Lyon Distilling. I'll present you with the desert island situation. If you had to take one bottle or a shipload of all of one type of product to a desert island that would have to sustain you for the rest of your life, what is that bottle?
For me, it just changed a few months ago. I went down to Mexico, and I had no interest in mezcal before this, and I really wasn't that interested in tequila, but I got to visit a lot of mezcal makers, and I love the nuances of it, and I love the way it makes me feel, because I feel like mezcal is a little bit of an upper, so I would take mezcal, and I think I'd never be bored.
I've never heard of mezcal described as an upper, so now I'm going to have to go and experiment with that.
Drink plenty. For me, rye whiskey.
Cool. Any specific type of brand?
Maryland rye. I mean, obviously, like my own, but
yes, sir.
Which is in way too short supply, so it would not last you on a desert island. You're gonna have to pick a friend's.
All right. Our classic question here is, if you could have a cocktail with anybody in history, past or present, who would it be? What would you talk about? What cocktail would you drink? And where would you go?
Oh gosh, this is a tough one. I guess I would choose. Shackleton, because he was notorious for on his voyages bringing whiskey with him, to the point where it was a huge burden on kind of their supply chain in the Arctic. So yeah, so give me Shackleton.
What's the full name?
What's that?
What's his full name?
Edward Shackleton.
Edward Shackleton. And
I
was
don't
he
know
a
this
British
fella.
guy or a U.S. guy?
He was a Brit. He was a Brit and famous Arctic explorer.
Arctic explorers are fascinating. They're kind of like the last version. That was definitely like the last terrestrial frontier we had, and they are, I feel like, the descendants of all the pirates, explorers, and rum runners like Sir
Sorry,
Francis
not
Drake.
Edward. It was Ernest Shackleton.
Ernest Shackleton.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Yeah. Very cool. Are there any books about rum or distilling or cocktails that you find particularly useful that you would recommend to our listeners?
Absolutely. Right before we started the distillery, took us about a year to get up and running, and we knew we wanted to make a couple of things. Rum was on the list, but of course Maryland Rye was probably the forerunner at the time. And I came across Wayne Curtis's And a Bottle of Rum. And I read it, and I devoured it, and I handed it to Ben, and I said, read this book, tell me what you think. And afterwards we both said, we're starting with rum.
Yeah. And it's funny because that book too, my best friend, even a number of years before that, he and I we would dork out on rum and, make rum cocktails and all this good stuff. And that was a book he had, but I hadn't read it. And then, later ended up picking it up after Jaime introduced it to me. But yeah, that's probably the best one.
Cool.
Yeah.
We will definitely link to And a Bottle of Rum in the show notes, so folks can definitely find that, pick it up, and devour it as well. If you could give any piece of advice to somebody, and this is specifically knowing that they are just starting out their journey as a home bartender, so probably a little bit new to rum and all the other spirits and the processes, do you have any advice for them that would kind of enhance their journey as a home bartender?
A question I've been asking people lately when they come in here is I used to always ask people, what do you like to drink? And now I just ask people, what do you like? What do you like flavor-wise? Do you like spicy food? Do you love sweets? And so I think don't let, drink, like the idea of it being a cocktail get in the way of remembering that it's a culinary experience. And I think we've also been able to work with a lot of chefs recently and seeing what they bring to the table because of food they have in the kitchen and flavors they like. That's what makes to me a really cool cocktail, You've got squash and you love squash and you want to make a squash syrup and add that to rum. Why not? And a chef just did that and blew my mind. So I think don't think within the confines of what's normally in a glass. Think about the things that you like to cook with and then play around with that in your cocktail.
That's really, really cool advice. Ben, do you have any?
I think, I don't know. I mean, to echo that, I think, a good starting point would be one of our favorite rum cocktails because everybody loves it, but just rum and ginger beer. Mm-hmm. It's one of those things where people are like, ginger beer, I don't know what that is. And as a sailor, I drink tons of these things, and they've been around forever. But they're like, ginger beer, I don't know about that. And then adding rum to it, and they drink it, they're like, this is the best thing I've ever had. And the nice thing, it kind of goes with everything. So sometimes it's just the simple combinations of things like that, but that's a really good, I think for rum, get some good ginger beer, get a decent rum, mix them together, and you're probably going to be really happy. And then you can kind of go from there.
And I would say one more postscript. Not all rum drinks should be sweet.
Right.
And I think looking for balance in your cocktail, we use a hot and spicy ginger beer to balance the sweetness of the rum. Habaneros with rum, different things, because classically when we all think back to our first rum drink, it was probably pink and it was probably too sweet. And that keeps a lot of people out of the rum game for a long time. And so, don't go for sweetness, go for balance.
Excellent.
Or my other favorite rum cocktail, and it's just a basic rum punch. It's just white grapefruit juice, rum, and then you grate a little fresh nutmeg on top. And it's really simple, really easy. It brings all these flavors together that you wouldn't logically conceive, and it's perfect that way. The nutmeg brings out the molassesy characteristic a little bit. The citrus just melds together with the rum in a really nice way. And because it's white grapefruit juice, it's not sweet. But if you want, you can add a little simple syrup to it to, tune it up. But it's a really simple, basic, kind of classic Caribbean rum punch recipe that is easy to do, and you can get the ingredients at the grocery store.
Absolutely. Those are really good pieces of advice. And it's interesting too, because some of the advice that we've been getting is like a lot of people will say, learn the basics, learn the classics. And, Jaime, what you said was like basically like follow your heart or your palate's heart. And that's a much more kind of, I think, liberating type of advice than like, nope, sit down with Mr. Boston Bartender's Guide, and when you're done, you can join the rest of us behind the bar.
Yeah, if you hate cherries, if
Right.
cherries always taste like medicine to you, don't try to make a Manhattan with cherry. Don't add a cherry. Just do something different that you like.
Yeah, it's not to say it's bad advice either, because I think you should know how to make a old fashioned. I think
Yes.
you should be able to make the same old fashioned every night. But then, there is a certain type of training wheels aspect, or a certain type of, slightly cushioned aspect to that, where we're cushioning ourselves from risk, but also from creativity. So I think as home bartenders, we need to figure out where our comfort zone is and be able to push it just a little bit. Which is a term that myself and the guys from the Speaking Easy podcast kind of coined together, called the zone of proximal drinking.
Oh my God, that's great.
So quickly before we wrap up here, how can people get a hold of you digitally if they want to start a conversation with you, follow you on social, and then maybe find out about the hours of your in-person locations so they can come and talk with you in person themselves?
We are very available online. Both Lyon Distilling, myself, Jaime, Blonde Booze Hound, and Ben, Whiskey Patrol, all have Instagrams, as well as my sister Jessie at Tiny Booze Cat. You can reach any or all of us anytime. We are famous for having the phone number of the distillery on every card, and we call it the cocktail hotline. So if you have questions, you can text the distillery at any hour of the day. It goes to my cell phone, and I will answer your questions. I do it quite often, whether it's with our rum or something else. We're on Facebook and the internet, and we're open 7 days a week.
And we do accommodate funny requests. I had a whole contingent of people from Grenada who came to the distillery one day. There were these Caribbean people who just loved rum, and one of them said, "So it's my mom's 65th birthday. Would you come to the party? Because she would love it if a distiller showed up and brought rum." And I was like, see what I can. Anyway, long story short, I showed up to the party and made this old Caribbean ladies night. So so it was great. So sometimes we do weird stuff like that too. So yeah,
But
so get in touch.
We're
Amazing.
We're on all the handles.
Very cool. Yeah, it's a really cool sort of loop of handles to follow. The Tiny Booze Cat, Blonde Booze Hound, Whiskey Patrol, Lyon Distilling, because you get to see sailing pictures from Ben. You get to see whatever liquor store slash restaurant Jessie is at with the rum. And then
Mine's just plants.
Usually
Plants and cocktails.
A lot of landscapes of the St. Michael's.
On tiki things.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Lyon Distilling's is the most legit. The only thing we're bad on, admittedly, is Twitter. I just can't.
Twitter sucks.
Yeah, someone once said it was like a cocktail party where everyone's talking and no one's listening. And ever since, I wanted nothing to do with it. But if you do tweet me, I will tweet you back.
Yes.
Eventually.
Good deal. Jaime and Ben, thanks so much for taking the time to talk to me. I know that you've got rum cooking in the back you got to get back to, and the tasting room's about to open up. So let us clear out here, and hopefully we will do a round 2 again at some point in the near future.
Anytime.
Sounds good.
Cheers.
Thanks.
Hey everybody, thanks for listening. I just want to remind you that this episode might be over, but the journey and the discussion are just beginning. If you're excited about the content in this or any other episode, please tell us. Follow us on Instagram at Modern Bar Cart for recipes and great product tips, or stalk me personally at Quixologist. That's Quix Ologist. You can also like us on Facebook by searching Modern Bar Cart, or hit us up directly via email by sending a note to podcast@modernbarcart.com. That email address, by the way, is also the one that you should use if you've got any cocktail or home bartending related questions you'd like us to address, or if you think you have a unique perspective on the cocktail world and would like to be interviewed for all to hear. I'll see you next time, but until then, drink responsibly and experiment boldly.